This episode is brought to you by Portland Distro. If you like underground music, movies, and more, go to portlanddistro.com for licensed merch, vinyl, CDs, and more. Plug in the discount code 10OFF, TENOFF, for a 10% discount at portlanddistro.com.
Your mission is to proceed up the Nung River in a Navy patrol boat. Pick up Colonel Kurtz's path at New Mung Ba. Follow it, learn what you can along the way. When you find the colonel, infiltrate his team by whatever means available, and terminate the colonel's command.
Terminate the colonel. He's out there operating without any decent restraint, totally beyond the pale of any acceptable human conduct. And he's still in the field commanding troops.
Terminate with extreme prejudice.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the pilot episode of Hollywoood Babylon. It's going to be a recurring show that I do with my friend Evan Hopper. How's it going, Evan?
How's it going, bud?
And the show is going to live on the Patreon feed, but this pilot is going to come out on the main feed. So if you want to check out the Patreon platform, you can join for as little as $1 a month and get access to all the bonus content. And for $5 a month, you get access to all of the episodes early. You get early access to everything. So this sub-series is going to be about films, not necessarily horror films because there's necromaniacs for that, but I would say kind of like films classics, things that are significant movies that are meaningful to both of us and are worth talking about and possibly sharing with people who haven't seen it. And so do you think Apocalypse Now, even though you and I consider it to be this iconic film, do you think it's like widely viewed by say younger people maybe?
I don't think so. No, I think it's probably a slept-on film.
So when did you first watch this movie, and when did you realize the brilliance of this film?
I don't know if I necessarily realized the brilliance of the film when I first saw the movie, because I was probably around 10 years old. My father, who was a military brat, was just always a huge advocate of old war movies. So I saw a lot of that growing up with him. And I guess he felt when I was 10 that I was like ready for a film like this, which is definitely a little bit more grotesque than some like the black and white, John Wayne war movies and stuff like this. And I remember seeing it the first time and just like, being young, the things that stood out to me the most were like a lot of the music that was in there, because my parents both were really into that era of music, and obviously like the Doors are pretty prominent throughout this movie. And I remember being a kid and like just sitting around in the living room and my parents listening to things like the Doors and et cetera on the sound system that we had in our house. And so when I first saw that was probably the thing that stuck out to me the most. But when I got older in my teenage years, I revisited the movie again. And I think that was probably when I started to really, because at that point I was like reading a lot more, and I was definitely more interested in these these archetypical like characters that pop up in books and film, and seeing like Marlon Brando's like performance in this movie really stuck out to me as like, yeah, this is something special. This is something different. So I would say that's maybe in my teenage years, maybe around like 13, 14 is when I started to appreciate this movie.
Yeah, right on, man. I mean, I was really young when I saw this movie. I think I might have been like 10 years old maybe when I saw this movie with my dad. And we saw them. He took me to see this in a movie theater. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And now anyone who listens to Necromaniacs will know that one of my earliest film memories as a basically almost a toddler was going to see The Exorcist with my family and at a drive-in, and so, I mean, probably the two biggest, film incidents in my life were watching this movie at way too young of an age, and also watching The Exorcist at way too young of an age. So
Sure.
yeah,
I have one of those too. Around the same age, my dad showed me the movie Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien,
yeah,
and I remember like being a kid and shitting my pants when the chest burster scene happens.
sure,
And but something about that, I don't know, maybe it's just because the way that I'm wired, I instantly, even though I was terrified by it, it instantly fascinated me, and I became hooked on the darker stuff, because it was just there was such a visceral response to movies like that, So I'm very grateful to have the experience. I don't know if I had children myself, I would let them watch shit like that at that age, but I'm glad I had that opportunity though,
yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the first time I saw it, and my dad was in the military, but he didn't see any action. He was in that age between. He was a little bit too old for he was in the military before Vietnam, but he was not in the military during the Korean War. So he was in that slice of time that was between those two wars.
Okay.
And so he didn't see any combat or anything like that. And he was always a big fan of war movies, and as a kid I'd watched Anzio and The Great Escape, which is not really a war movie, but it's a prisoner of war movie.
Yeah.
I was way into that kind of stuff,
Yeah, I liked
movies.
the longest day was a really good one and stuff like that. Yeah, I remember all those.
So I'd never seen war portrayed this way, So I remember I had a lot of questions after I left the film with my dad. I was what's but he didn't know either because he'd never been in combat.
Sure.
And as the years went by, I started reading because I was still very fascinated by the movie because it was such a weird. I'm like, was that what war is like? I thought it was all organized and all this kind of stuff, and I would read articles about it every now and then. You'd pick up something like a magazine and there'd be an article about this film, or you'd hear people talk about it, and it would say that veterans were that's kind of how it was. People were on acid, doing heroin. There was no leadership. It was fucking crazy. There was just total chaos. No one knew what was going on ever, and that's piqued my interest. And I think when I was in high school, we had purchased this on VHS tape, so I was starting to watch it a lot more. And Taxi Driver and Apocalypse Now were my go-to films, as well as all the horror stuff I was watching throughout my high school years. And I started really resonating with the film because of just this very staunch anti-war kind of vibe. And we can get down to at the end of this, we're going to talk about our actual closing thoughts on this whole film. But the movie has held up over the years as being just an incredible film, and also that message has never really diminished with me,
I'm glad you brought.
If anything, it's blossomed into other ideas, so we can talk about that towards the end of this thing. Yeah,
I think it's great that you also see it as sort of an anti-war movie, because I think of this movie in much of the same way that the 1968 movie All is Quiet on the Western Front which is another war movie, but it shows the grittier side of war, not the glorified, the Allies storm the beach and then they overcome and persevere and all this, which a lot of war movies at the time did, because no one wants to see the hero die, or no one wants to see the true horror of war. And I think all is Quiet on the Western Front is a good example of that as well. And I think this movie does a really good job at showing you the true insanity and the true disorganization of what was really going on during that time. And paints war in a more realistic light, where there is chaos and there is just complete chaos going on everywhere,
and also just more an emotionally realistic portrayal, because no one, even if you win, quote unquote win, there's no real winners. People are just completely shattered by these experiences,
Right.
Yeah, so this is based on a novella called Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, and not really based on it. This is not an adaptation. It's more of a spiritual connection to the film.
Sure.
This isn't telling the story that Conrad told in his story, but there's definitely elements that are similar. They're going up the river. There's the character of Marlowe, who is the stand-in for Willard, and there's Kurtz, the character of Kurtz, and it has to do with ivory trading, and he goes up the river. There's cruelty to the locals and that sort of thing. But that's kind of where the similarities end in between the original text and the filmic adaptation, or inspiration.
Yeah.
It's more of an inspiring text for this movie.
That's how I would say it too. Yeah, I would say this film is loosely inspired by the events that took place in that book, but it definitely it has its own story to tell.
Yeah. So the movie initially was released in 1979, and then in 2001, a Redux version, an expanded version of this film, that had like 49 extra minutes, was released. And so, do you have any thoughts? Like, what's your preferred cut of this movie?
I think the theatrical version is the best cut, and I say that just because I think that's the intended film that you're supposed to see, and I think it's almost completely flawless in my opinion. But being a movie fan, I always like stuff like director commentary and director's cuts, and so if you have seen this film and you've never seen the Redux, I do recommend watching the Redux version, because there's scenes in that movie that don't really, I wouldn't say it adds or takes away from the actual story, but it gives you just a little bit more footage that wasn't available in the theatrical version. That's kind of cool,
Yeah.
especially if you know some of the facts behind it and all. So as we get into talking about this movie, the opening scene, for those who have seen the movie, is a scene of Martin Sheen's character Willard, where he's in a hotel in Saigon, and he's just drinking, and he's sort of going insane in this hotel room. And in the Redux version of this, you see the original scene where Martin Sheen was actually drunk and was actually going insane, and it's not in camera, but it's off camera. He's yelling at Francis Ford Coppola to keep rolling, and he punches this mirror, and he cuts his thumb open. He really is bleeding in the scene and stuff, and you get little things like that you don't get in the full theatrical version. So it's cool if you've already seen the movie to go back and watch these extra scenes and kind of compare it to the real film, and to know where these actors were in their head at that time. It's really cool, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think the theatrical release from '79 was the way to go, and that's over 2 hours long. I mean, that's that's a commitment, a time commitment. And the Redux is almost an hour longer, so you're looking at 3+ hours.
It's 3.5. It's 3.5 for the Redux, and I think it's 2.5 for the theatrical.
Yeah,
around that.
Yeah. So and I think that the Redux version, the narrative really slows down because of what I actually would say that it changes the story a little bit. It changes Willard's his character a bit. There's distractions that are in the Redux version that I think really were benefited by getting cut. So that makes that really keeps everything quote unquote lean and mean, even though the movie's 2.5 hours long.
Right, and that's my contention too. Is I think that you get the intended story with the theatrical version, but again, if you're a nerd and you want to see some interesting things that you didn't know existed. I mean, it should be said that there was 230 hours of recorded footage for this movie.
Damn.
So, and the movie got reduced to 2.5 hours. Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of footage in this film that even in the Redux is not shown to you, so it's cool. It's interesting because, I mean, it is such an iconic film, and it was such a it was such a huge endeavor. I mean, just so people know, like, I don't remember what the original budget for this film is, but if you know anything about Hollywood films, like the budgets are huge. And this film went so over budget that Francis Ford Coppola put up another $7 million of his own money to finish the filming of this movie. So it was a huge endeavor, especially at that time. And so it is interesting to see some of the other stuff that was filmed and why it was filmed, and kind of just, it's just a neat thing because it's such a monumental undertaking.
What I recommend is, and this is all available, on various services like Prime and Apple Music or Apple TV, movie aspects. There you can also purchase the documentary Hearts of Darkness, and I would think a great pairing would be the theatrical cut plus Hearts of Darkness, and that gives you all this background about what was going on, Martin Sheen, Marlon Brando's lack of preparation, all this kind of stuff is in there.
Yeah. Dennis Hopper, like, just going missing for like 6 months, and
it's like that story is equally as interesting as the movie, in my opinion. So
I think so too. I also, and we'll touch on this more as we go on, but like, one of the interesting things about great movies is sort of like the stories that you hear about the things that happen on set or happen with the actors. I mean, many people who listen to your other podcasts, Necromaniacs, will know that, like, on the set of The Omen, there was like a lot of deaths attributed to like the filming of that. Or like in the filming of Kubrick's Shining, there was a lot of like people like kind of going crazy and like weird happenings and stuff like that. And this movie is like no different. All the actors, well, not all of the actors, but a majority of the actors that were in this film all experienced some sort of like personal insanity. This movie was a taxing movie on everybody involved. Even Francis Ford Coppola is like stated saying that several times, like people around him were saying that he was like threatening to blow his brains out because it was just such like a crazy undertaking, and like being in the jungle and being like, it was almost too much for even these actors who were doing this, like, and so like, something to say about like, suffering for your craft, right?
Sure.
you know
So let's run down the cast. There's a lot of heavy hitters in this movie. So the main cast obviously is Marlon Brando as Colonel Kurtz and Martin Sheen as Captain Willard. And Kurtz is decorated U.S. Army Special Forces soldier. Martin Sheen is this is his third tour in Vietnam, and in the beginning of the movie we see he's like pretty shattered, like emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, he's an assassin. He goes on all these covert operations, these black ops sort of missions. And another big name, though he has a more of a supporting role in the film, but I'm going to mention it with these guys just because of who he is. We have Robert Duvall as Colonel Bill Kilgore of the 1st Squadron, 9th Cavalry Regiment, Air Cav. And didn't you stalk Robert Duvall or something like that recently?
I did.
Yeah.
So there's a place near where I live called the Plains, Virginia, and there is like a 300-acre horse ranch there that's owned by Robert Duvall, and I got the wild hair up my ass that I was just gonna like go over there and just like talk to Mr. Duvall. And I went there. I went to the ranch, and I got met by a nice gentleman who told me Mr. Duvall is not. He said that Mr. Duvall is not currently there, and he asked me politely to leave. So I didn't get any further than the actual driveway to the ranch, but I was blissfully optimistic that I was gonna like just sit down and just ask a couple of questions, but of course the guy's a celebrity and I didn't want to push it too far or nothing like that, so I didn't. But I did go there though. Yeah.
Did you actually ask to see him like when this guy came around? Like, did you actually say,
yeah,
I
went
see
there.
Robert Duvall?
I was like, hey, I just like I'm a fan of Robert Duvall, and I was wondering if I could like come and like check out the ranch and maybe meet Mr. Duvall. And they're like, nah, get out of here.
That's fucking balls, man. I got to be honest. That's a lot of balls, dude.
Well, I mean, it's free to ask a question, right? The worst they can say is no. So I figured, like, what I have to lose, like, so, so- and I mean, I lost some gas money, but that's not it. It's still worth a shot. And I would have loved to talk to that guy because I mean, outside of this movie, I'm a huge fan of like everything that guy's ever done, like everything from Falling Down to Secondhand Lions. Like an Open Range and stuff. I'm a huge fan of it all. So
You ever see the Apostle with him? It's one of his later films.
yeah. I saw that.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, another group of people we spent a lot of the movie with is the crew of the PBR Street Gang. It's a boat
Yep.
that Captain Willard uses to go up the river to get to Kurtz. And we have Albert Hall as Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
He's the chief of the boat, and he was tasked with bringing Willard up the river. Frederick Forrest as chef, a tightly wound former New Orleans chef of all things.
And Saucier.
And
don't
Saucier,
forget.
yeah. He specializes in sauces.
And sauces.
Sam Bottoms as Lance, former pro surfer dude from California, and he's like a gunnery mate, I guess. And then, of course, not last but not least in this group, we have Lawrence Fishburne, young. I think he literally was 17 when he was in this movie.
Actually, I looked this up, and he was 15.
15.
He lied about his age and said that he was 17 because that's what what AG needed you to do in order to like be in films. And he lied. He was 14 when production started, and he was 15 when filming started.
Wow. So he was like a little kid in this movie.
He was a kid. Yeah.
And he plays Mr. Clean.
And I'll tell you a fun thing I also found out about Sam Bottoms, which you can definitely see in the film if you've ever been around degenerate people. Like Sam Bottoms was every single one of his scenes either on LSD or on speed. It's like a known fact. I read it in interviews. Like he 100% was either on LSD or on speed in almost every single one of his scenes in that movie.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can kind of get that like that vibe from him too, right? He's sort of like doing the Tai Chi all the time, and he's like, he's just sort of sitting on the edge of the boat. He seems to be more like the free spirit, like on the PBR street team boat, like.
Well, he, I mean, he's in this case, he's method acting because the reality is Lance, the character Lance, was probably high on LSD throughout his entire tour of duty in Vietnam. I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of this method acting sort of thing going on because again, like we mentioned a little bit earlier with Martin Sheen was absolutely an alcoholic during the filming of this movie, and struggling with that, and was going through a divorce at the time, and so his the way that he like eyeballs alcohol in that film, I've seen that look in alcoholics. There's a specific scene when we'll get to it, but I'll just briefly touch on it. Like when they go to that one base where the USO show is getting ready to happen, and the guy gives him slaps Martin Sheen's character Willard in the chest with a bottle of whiskey and says, "Hey, no hard feelings, right?" And he kind of like just looks side-eyed, looks at that bottle of whiskey for a second. Like I've seen that look. That looks a real look, And Dennis Hopper's character is wacky on drugs, and Sam Bottoms is wacky on drugs. There was a lot of debauchery on set, which I think adds to the filming, and it's something that you lose. I mean, if you have a good actor, I suppose a good actor can portray like these sorts of things in modern films. But something that I sort of miss in old Hollywood that isn't present today is that there was like a certain amount of danger, like they weren't smoking Morleys back in the day. They're really smoking cigarettes. Oh, by the way, I have to say, dude, watching this film as a former smoker made me want to smoke cigarettes so fucking bad. I don't know about you. Like, I know you never smoked cigarettes, but like, but he's like it's one of those films where like smoking cigarettes looks really cool, and like I actually had anxiety watching everybody smoking cigarettes in this film. It was like fucking, it brought back memories of smoking soft pack Marlboro cigarettes and shit like this. Like, yeah, but yeah, there was definitely a lot of debauchery going on set with this film.
Then we have Dennis Hopper, the legendary Dennis Hopper, as an unnamed journalist. When Willard asks him, he's like, ask him who he is, like, who are you? Dennis Hopper's response is, who are you?
Right, yeah, right. I'm an American
journalist, photojournalist. That's who he is.
That's who he is. Yeah.
But in some ways, and we talked about this on phone a little bit, and in some ways, not exactly. He's almost like Zadok Allen in Shadow over Innsmouth, the Lovecraft story, where he's like the watcher, like kind of not really involved. Kurtz he tolerates our American photojournalist, but he's not, in danger. Well, actually, he did threaten to kill him if he took his picture.
He goes, I took his picture, and and he said I'm gonna kill you, and he meant it.
Yeah, but he's not in any real danger. He's not involved in any of these missions, but he's just there as an observer, and he kind of acts as a non-active player, where he
or like a liaison.
Yeah, liaison. Like he kind of helps move the narrative along, and
I thought that Shadow of Innsmouth analogy was a good one, just because like old Zadok in Shadow of Innsmouth, like he somehow doesn't. They don't turn him into a deep one. They don't kill him. They just sort of let him be because he's like the old drunk, and so he's like he's not a threat to them. But there's always the question of why, because like he's also an old drunk, so you could just kill the guy and it would be inconsequential if you did, and it's the same with Dennis Hopper's character. It's like he could have just been murdered off immediately, yet for whatever reason he's allowed to stay and allowed to document everything.
And he makes a statement of oh no, you don't talk to Kurtz, you listen. Right. So that's the main. Those are the heavy hitters, and of course we have the brass, the guys who are making all of this, who are the reason for this mission. We have G.D. Spradlin as Lieutenant General R. Corman, named after Roger Corman, by the way, and he's the one who issues the orders. Like he develops the orders to have Kurtz terminated. Jerry Zeismer, who's possibly a CIA person. I'm assuming he's a CIA guy.
We never know, but he's dressed differently from like the enlisted men, right? He's got like civilian. The white shirt and the black tie.
He's not military, he's civilian. And he is unnamed, and he just kind of lurks in the background. And he has one line, which we'll get to when we get to the opening scene, the meeting.
Yeah.
A very, very young, fresh-faced Harrison Ford as Colonel Lucas. That's Corman's sidekick, his aide, if you will.
And a fun fact for all the movie nerds, Francis Ford Coppola originally had George Lucas on board to help with either the funding or the production of this film, and Lucas pulled out, but he still had Ford. So he named Ford's character G. Lucas as sort of like a fuck you to George Lucas. Because he's like, I got your boy, I got Han Solo in my film, and it's just like, it's like kind of like a funny little like diss to George Lucas in this film that will eventually become an epic film, right? Yeah.
That's why I mentioned two other guys. We got there was another small role, which goes to Scott Glenn, who's like a pretty well known, at least from the 70s and 80s character actor. You might know him from Urban Cowboy. Of all films. And he plays Colby, who is basically another soldier assigned with the same mission that Willard has, but just disappeared. And we'll find out what happened to him later. And then uncredited, we have R. Lee Ermey, whom some of you might know him from Full Metal Jacket as Sergeant Hartman. And,
or mail call on History Channel.
Yeah, there you go. And he's not credited, but he appears as a helicopter pilot in this movie.
And what's great about him is, you know, in the same sense of Full Metal Jacket, you know, the original drill instructor for Full Metal Jacket was just like a Hollywood actor, and R. Lee Ermey was actually casted as one of the enlisted men in Full Metal Jacket. And when the drill instructor was like walking up and down the lines, like the and insulting everybody, you know, in that famous scene where he's, you know, let me hear your war cry, you know, that kind of thing. R. Lee Ermey was laughing like during the filming of that, and Stanley Kubrick, as you know, is like not one for like actors getting out of line. And he's like, "Why the fuck are you laughing right now?" And he's like, "This guy is a joke." He's like, he's like, "Oh, you think you can do better?" And then R. Lee Ermey like pulls off like the drill instructor performance that we know from, you know, the famous Full Metal Jacket, right? So he was actually a real enlisted man, and like he actually had seen combat and stuff like that. So getting him in that movie, even though it's like he's just a helicopter pilot and he doesn't really have much to do with the actual story of the film, like when you listen to him talk in those scenes and stuff like that, he's actually speaking from experience, which is kind of cool in my opinion. Yeah.
Also, like in Full Metal Jacket, he's a little bit too old to be an enlisted man. That dude's like probably like 40 years old at that point, and everyone else is like 18, 19-year-old kids. So, you know, like I said, he needed a body, you know. But I mean,
they needed a body. Yeah, he probably wasn't going to be like a main character like Gomer Pyle or something like that. But like, you know, that he was just a guy in line, but he was laughing. And Kubrick, it's a famous like moment. Like Kubrick's like, "Why the fuck are you laughing right now?" And he's like, "Because this guy's a pussy."
Yeah.
It's like a drill instructor would never say the things that this guy is saying, and so he got recasted as the actual drill instructor in that film, and that's just a testament to, like, you know, R. Lee Ermey. I love that man. I love him in Texas Chainsaw Massacre too. I think he's the best character in the remakes of those films. He's just so sadistic and evil. He pulls it off well.
So the movie has the best intro ever. You know, we got the end by the doors. You know, we have these beautifully shot scenes of helicopters dropping napalm on this beautiful jungle in the night. You know, and it's, you know, my recollection of this and watching it in a movie theater was pretty breathtaking. You know, with this gigantic screen and seeing all this carnage. You know, this immolation of this beautiful rainforest. You know, with the Doors playing in the background. And at the time, I didn't even know who the Doors were. It's like I was maybe listening to like Foreigner and, you know, Kansas and stuff like that when I was a kid. You know, the soundtrack to Grease or something was really what I was, you know, rocking at that age. And then I heard this really scary music, and it was unsettling. And the beginning of that film goes down and is the greatest introduction to any movie I've ever seen, you know.
Absolutely. And I don't think you could have picked a better song than The End by the Doors. I think it fits this film, and it permeates throughout the film as well. You know, it's in the beginning and it's also in the end of the film, and like it just works so well with the overall feeling of this movie. Like it really does. It really does.
So we find Captain Willard between missions. He's, you know, just in his room, the walls closing in, peering out the window at Saigon, waiting for another mission. And you know, we get to know a lot about his character. You know, he describes being home and always thinking about being back out there. And then when he's out there, all he can think about is being home. And then when he went home, there was nothing. And his wife, the divorce, there's a nice little moment where he's looking at a picture of his wife and he just burns their picture with a cigarette. And then you just realize this guy has completely ended the illusion of civilization. He knows that doesn't exist anymore, and he exists in this like netherworld of violence and brutality and nihilism, you know.
There's a good line in that scene too that like really sort of paints like the psyche of Willard's character, and it's when he says like, "Every day I'm in here, I'm getting softer. Every day Charlie's out in the woods getting stronger." You know, he really feels that like he's wasting his time when he's not being in the field and doing like military operations.
Yeah. And there's the famous scene that you touched on earlier where you know, I imagine Willard had a lot of nights like this where he's just by himself in this room drinking hard liquor and getting fucking obliterated,
Annihilated.
annihilated.
Yeah, annihilated.
And just as a quick aside, which you touched on earlier, Martin Sheen was an alcoholic. He was going through a divorce. He was 36 years old, and in Hearts of Darkness, you learn that during the filming he had a heart attack.
Yeah, he does.
So he's like the character of Martin Sheen, the actor Martin Sheen, the man, kind of mirrors Captain Willard as the character. You know, he's pretty much in this really down part of his life. You know, very.
It was said in some interviews I read as well about this film that much like the Heath Ledger character as the Joker, some of Martin Sheen's closest co-actors and stuff like that were actually becoming concerned with Martin Sheen because they felt that he was becoming Willard.
Yeah. Everything was real. He was drunk. The blood's real. The mirror is not a gag mirror. He punches this mirror. He's got blood all over his hands. And passes out, and then wakes up with these two MPs looking to collect him and bring him to ComSac. Now, the funny thing was when they show up in his room, he's naked and covered in blood, and then sheets of blood all over him. And these two guys are like, Captain Willard.
How are you, sir?
How are you, sir?
Are you doing okay? He goes, what do you think? He goes like, well, how do I look? Or something like that, right? He's like, how do I look?
And he's like, hey, buddy, can you close the door? And when they tell him they have to escort him to the airfield, he's like, "What are the charges?"
Right. That's his first thing is he thinks he fucked and did something wrong, right? Like, yeah. Like there's no charges, sir. Like you've been requested. He's like, and then they throw his ass in this shower, like, you know, give him like that cold bath, you know, so he can fucking sober up real quick. Yeah. But,
yes. So Willard gets cleaned up and they bring him, and during this, there's the voiceover where he was talking about, I wanted a mission, and for my sins, they gave me one. And that's actually right before the MPs come to get him. And that sets the table for this little drama we have. And he also mentions that I was going to the worst place in the world, and I didn't even know it yet.
Right.
And
yeah.
It kind of gives you an idea of what's in store for him. So this is like where the whole mission is being presented to Willard, and this is where we have the brass. We got the CIA guy, the unnamed CIA person. We got General Corman, and we got Colonel.
And we got Lucas. Yeah.
And they paint a picture of Colonel Kurtz as being this one of the most outstanding soldiers, officers the country has ever produced. And then they add the caveat of he joined the Special Forces, and his methods became unsound. So this is an important part of the narrative, is because essentially because of he's being charged with murder for killing an official at I think some sort of official in this village, that the VC village, where he wasn't ordered to do it. He just did it on his own. So they're charging him with murder. Now, I maintain that similar to Dante's Inferno, this movie is an infernal comedy in a lot of ways, because you're in war and they're sending another soldier out to kill someone they've accused with murder. And
I actually had the same exact thought, and I didn't have that thought in that scene. I had that thought when they're on the boat and they're going up the river, and he's reading like the dossiers, the letters that he sent to his wife.
Yeah.
That Kurtz has sent to his wife, and he says they've accused me of murder of 6 people, and like I thought the same thing. I'm like, well, that's kind of ironic, isn't it? Like, isn't all war just murder? But like, there's you know, the justified murder, and then there's unjustified murder somehow. You know, like, you know, I found it also comedic in a dark way.
Yeah. And this is where Corman gives this little speech where he talks about there's a conflict in every human heart between good and evil. Sometimes the dark side overcomes what Lincoln calls better angels of our nature. Every man has a breaking point, and obviously Walt Kurtz has reached his. Now, the fact that he called him Walt Kurtz implies that Corman probably knows Kurtz personally. Like, he probably knows this man as a friend. You know, they're both like high-ranking, high-level, elite, military guys. Yet he's ordering his murder or his assassination. Actually, he's when I call it what you will, he's sending Willard up there to kill him. And
Right.
I found it interesting that he doesn't actually give the order. This is like some mobster shit right here, where he kind of lays out the background of what's going on, but Lucas is the one who actually gives him the order to go up there and assassinate Kurtz.
And there's a very interesting thing in this scene that I still can't really figure out why, but when Harrison Ford's character Lucas tells Willard what he has to do, he gets like choked up in that moment, and I'm not sure what that's about, because I and maybe it's because like you're asking an American to kill another American. I guess it's like that's probably the most like sane conclusion to come to, but I'm that scene stuck with me when watching this, because I was like kind of curious why he got choked up in that moment. If the guy's a lunatic, and yes, he's a decorated soldier, but like he's a lunatic, right? Wouldn't you be like a little bit more? There's just something weird about that scene, and not bad weird, but like just there's a thing about that I haven't still kind of made up my mind about why that scene happens.
I think it's like one of the most interesting scenes in the movie, really, because there's a lot of stuff going on there, and I think that the reality is, like, you think about the gravity of what they're asking him to do. Like they're
right.
I mean, I'm no military guy, I've never been in war, but I don't imagine that it's common to have your own guys killed. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Especially someone who they may actually have. Well, it's pretty clear that Corman knows him personally.
Right.
Lucas may know him by reputation. He's like a high performing elite officer. So he's a guy who they probably really looked up to at some point, and prior. And it's uneasy. Like Lucas is like, he's coughing and very nervous when he's giving the order and they say it in like technical jargon, to terminate his command, and even Willard has this like kind of awestruck look on his face, and he's like, terminate Kurtz. And that's when our CIA ghoul, the guy who's like lurking in the background with his fucking tie and white shirt on, the civilian, steps up with his only line in the movie: terminate with extreme prejudice.
Right.
Yeah. That scene is so heavy, man. And also
it's heavy. And there's another thing in that scene that like kind of goes unnoticed, but like in the beginning of that encounter, when Willard first walks into the room, he's offered a cigarette and he says no.
Yeah.
And then after the CIA guy goes exterminate with extreme prejudice, he offers him a cigarette and he takes it. And it's a subtle thing.
Yep.
But it actually, I think it speaks volumes, because like he's this unbreakable Willard is kind of stressed, right?
Sure.
So now he needs the cigarette, right?
Also, this is once again like a part of the divine comedy aspect of this thing is he gets invited into this office, probably like a trailer or something like that, that the general occupies, and that there's gentle music playing, like pleasant music is playing. He invites him to sit down for this nice meal. All the
the shrimp, is it the shrimp thing?
No. What I was saying, just the idea that they're in Saigon somewhere or whatever, in a war zone, and they're making everything. There's this idea of civility that's portrayed throughout the film, that we're having roast beef and shrimp.
Right.
Meanwhile, I'm about to order you to kill one of our own guys.
Well, there's a funny line in that scene too, where he goes, "I don't know how you feel about shrimp, but if you eat one of these, like, you'll never have to prove your loyalty to me ever again."
Yeah, your bravery. Yeah.
Your bravery. Yeah, your bravery to me ever again.
Yeah.
It's a comedic line. I mean, it's like set in like a very somber, like, setting, but that's a funny line.
Yeah. I mean, this movie kind of goes back to the original comedies. Of like, back to like Roman times, maybe, where a comedy isn't necessarily side-splitting laughter, but it's more like the use of irony. And I think that that's why I like this film, even though it's like a really bleak, intense, heavy movie. To me, is like the original idea of what a comedy is, where there's like a ironic, absurd situation that you're involved in. You know?
Yeah, I agree. I think some of the best comedy is dark, and it touches on irony. I think irony is like the best form of comedy because it juxtaposes like the sane with the insane.
Yeah.
You know.
So then, Willard gets inserted with his crew on PBR Street Gang, and they begin their travel up the river. And once again, the civility and comforts of home come into play when they run into Kilgore,
Right.
and his air cav people, and Kilgore, he's like this super alpha male sort of guy,
He's an Ubermensch,
Yeah,
like,
Ubermensch. He totally understands that he's going to come through this entire war without a scratch on him, and he's like, has this air of invincibility about him, and there's like another iconic scene where they, with the Flight of the Valkyries, and they attack the Vietnamese village, and they go in there and they clean house, and they have to aid in the boat being brought up river. And at the end of that operation, everyone's outside and they're, having steaks and drinking beer. Kilgore's strumming a guitar. Actually, no, that happens before this, actually. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, that happens before. Yeah, that happens before. Yeah.
But there's this whole sense of, like, this, and then I'm going to revisit this idea, but trying to bring the civilization with you into chaos.
Right.
And when you bring civilization with you into chaos, you try to like place this in a completely chaotic situation that it always fails. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make by mentioning that.
Sure. Well, there's a thing that's also important, like in those two segments, that Kilgore, and I thought this was kind of interesting too, and I don't know what your take is on it, but Kilgore, for whatever reason, sort of takes a liking to Lance.
Oh, it's because they're all surfers, man. That's the thing.
Yeah, the surfing thing, but it's even more so than that. Like I almost saw like some more like, parental, like, fatherly, like kind of admiration towards Lance from Kilgore, because like amongst all the men that were there, like, he's sort of like singling out Lance and like asking him about like the breaks in the waves and like, all this kind of stuff. Right. And he seems to have like a certain, I mean, again, it is 100% because of the surfing aspect, but I saw like in his character that he sort of like kind of, looked on Lance fondly. And you can see that like in several scenes. Absolutely, like in the one scene you were talking about when they're eating steaks and they're like sitting around the campfire, and he's talking about like the 6 foot breaks that they get like at this one beach. Kilgore like immediately like his eyes light up and like he wants to go surf, right? And so they like we attack at dawn, and they go there. They literally go there like, I mean, to kill the enemy, but also like because they want to go fucking surf, right? And like there's when they land on that village, and like you were saying, like Kilgore has like this invincibility about him. Like he's just standing up the whole time, and he's like, look at those breaks. Look how they're going to the left, and look how that one goes to the right. Like you could have 2 men out there fucking surfing the same time, going 2 different directions, right? And meanwhile, like there's like bullets flying and bombs blowing up, and Lance's character is like he's freaking out. Like he's like down in the sand of the beach, right?
Yeah. And
like Kilgore just like wants him to like just look and like tell him like he's so unfazed by all this war. And I think Kilgore's character is a very important character as well in this whole storyline, albeit that he's only in like, maybe 10 minutes of the entire film, maybe 15 minutes of the entire film. But, this, as we go on this, like telling of this story, we're experiencing different people at different levels of insanity.
Yeah.
And I think Kilgore is actually insane too, but he's not like crazy in the sense that like he is, he's lost his mind in the way that we would think people would lose their mind. He's sort of just like unfazed by war. Like he's been maybe inundated with it for so long that like he's not like, there's the famous line, he calls him there. So on this scene that we're talking about, they get to the beach and there's all kind of carnage going on. There's a helicopter that lands and it like tries to pick up some injured soldiers, and a woman runs out and throws a grenade in the helicopter and blows the helicopter up, and there's just carnage all around. And meanwhile, like Kilgore's character is just fascinated about the waves. Like he doesn't even care about like all this carnage that's going on. And he finally calls in an airstrike and he delivers like one of the best lines in this film, and it's I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Yeah,
because these planes come through and they napalm like the whole jungle. And then he talks about an experience that he had in his previous life at a different battle, and about how when he they used napalm in another circumstance, and he sat there and he smelled it, and he goes, that smell, that gasoline, he goes, smells like victory, and it's just like this guy is just like he's hardened by war to the point where he's not really human anymore, and in a way that makes him crazy, but not the crazy that we'll see later on in the film. But he is still a crazy character in a way.
Well, as you progress through the movie, you see like various stages of what by Kurtz's reckoning is required to win a situation like this. You know what I mean?
And that's why I think your analogy of a divine comedy is why this is good, because like that would be the first level of hell, or the second level of hell, right? Is Kilgore, right?
Yeah.
And as you descend further, you get further and further into it, right? But I love Kilgore's character. I think he's got some great lines, and he has this one great line too that I really like, where he it's like it's the last line that he has in the movie, and he just looks at Martin Sheen's character, or Lance. It's one of the two, Lance or Martin Sheen, and he just goes. It seems like he's actually going to say more, but he doesn't. He just looks at them and he goes, "Don't worry, one of these days this war will be over." And then he pauses, like he's going to say something else, and then he just gets up and walks away, right? And in that moment, I felt like it's almost like that was actually like a sad statement, because like in a way he didn't want the war to be over.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that speaks to a lot of different things, man. Like I said, I've never been in a war, but I've been around people who've been in a war, and
sure,
life is different when you come home from something like that, Yeah, and I think that
how are you going to go back to normal life after surfing in like the Vietnam ocean while there's bombs going off and stuff? Like there's nothing that can compare to that kind of like exhilaration,
ordering airstrikes, and seeing people, and the violence too, man. And maybe for the first time ever, you see dead kids, like you see kids like blown up and stuff in a lot of these scenes. Like that's like, this is one of the first films that is doesn't paint combat in a glorious way. You know what I mean? Like you see like people with their legs missing, and you see dead kids, dead children, and fuck ups and things being mishandled and stuff like that too,
And for the horror fans, not that this is like something to glorify, but it is something that's not been done very often. A lot of the dead people in this movie are actually real dead people.
Really?
Yes.
Whoa! Holy shit! I didn't even know that.
They went to a morgue, especially like when we get to like the Kurt scene towards the end of this conversation. A lot of those hanging bodies and stuff were actually real dead bodies that they got from a morgue.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn. Okay.
It's pretty heavy,
Brutal,
I don't think that's been done since like Cannibal Holocaust, or I don't know, maybe they've done it in other films, but I only know of Cannibal Holocaust outside of this movie where they actually did something like that.
Wow. Yeah. Another key scene. There's a couple of things that happen with whenever they show this superposition of civilization over the wildness and the chaos. It always ends in chaos. Like even with one of the iconic scenes is when they have the Playboy bunnies and the USO show, and they're trying to entertain the troops, and these dudes just lose their mind, and basically a riot happens, and they hustle these ladies out on a helicopter. and there's a voiceover with Martin Sheen's character with Willard, and he's saying, Charlie doesn't get any R&R, like he's out in hunkered in the jungle, with a good R&R for Charlie is a bowl of rice.
It's cold rice.
Yeah. That will come. We'll revisit that stuff later on. We talk about Kurtz's philosophy on this whole thing.
And another nerdy fact, in that scene, there's a lot of barrels that are marked with a name that's called Dow Chemicals. And that's a nod to the actual Dow Chemical Company that was responsible for the pesticide that they tried to use to like kill the jungle, which is aptly named Agent Orange. Yeah. And so you'll see in that scene, you'll see a lot of guys like, leaning on barrels, and these barrels like everywhere. And they're black with like the white lettering of Dow Chemicals on it. And that's actually, that was just a little, again, like a little nod to like the real horrors of Vietnam and stuff like that in that scene.
There's a scene where Kurtz is, it's like this magnet drawing Willard down up the river to him. Okay, and there's a singular purpose. Willard is clearly different than the guys on PBR Street Gang. He is someone who is perfectly equipped for violence, war, getting the mission done, and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
it's pretty clear that maybe with the exception of Phillips, who's appears to be a good officer. He runs the ship in like a very
a bit older too.
Yeah, he's a little bit older. He's been around. But no one else on that boat is really equipped for being in war. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, none of those guys, Mr.
There's
Clean.
there's a line in the movie that says, like, I can't imagine any of these, like, men being older than 17, and all of them just have admirations of going home.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a scene where we truly understand the difference between Willard and the rest of the crew, is when there's a fishing boat on the river. And Phillips is like, we have to check this out, and Phillips says, we have to check this out. And Willard's like, no, my mission takes precedence over anything. It's a priority. Get me up river. And he's like, well, this is my boat. So they stop. They check out this fishing boat. They send Chef on board. And he's like, it's just mangoes, man. There's nothing here. Got some rice. And this young girl goes to something that's hidden. And then they just light the entire boat up, which was crazy if you think about it, because Chef is right in the line of fire. And they basically light this entire, just fucking destroy these people, right? It turns out there's just a dog. And one of this woman is injured, not dead. And they're like, oh, check her out. We have to bring her on board. And then Willard just kills her, shoots her.
Right.
And it's like, I told you not to stop. And it's like, that's like, we got to do this thing, man. I don't care about your protocol or what your rules are. We have to go from point A to point B. I have to get to Kurtz, and I have my mission. I have to complete.
And again, that kind of speaks to like these more hardened people like Kilgore as well, where like there's like a level of calm in the people like Willard and Kilgore and even Kurtz. There's like a level of calm, even though like they're capable of doing like such horrible things, whereas everyone else, especially these young kids, that are on this boat are they're just kind of freaking out, like they're on edge constantly, like that scene you were saying, like when Chef goes on the boat, like he's actively angry at Phillips because you can tell in that moment, like he's had enough of this. He's like, what are they fucking doing? I'm standing here, I'm looking. They got rice, they got mangoes, they got this, And Phillips is like, no, get on the boat and fucking search. And he's like, he's actively like talking back to his superior, because you can just tell he's just had like enough of this. He's reaching his breaking point, Yeah. And I think is that before or after the tiger scene? I think it's after the tiger scene.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. The tiger scene's cool, but it's kind of like, it's just like dressing in the movie, if you ask me, really.
Well, no, but I think that kind of like sets the precedence for like Chef's unwinding, because he's like he starts to go insane in that moment, when they're out there looking for mangoes, and then like the tiger jumps out and he freaks out and he's like, I should never leave the boat, and like, and like he's sort of like losing his mind. I didn't sign up for this shit, And then we see the scene that you were just talking about, and he has to be the one that goes in the boat. So he's already kind of unraveling in that moment, you know. And again, this movie, in my opinion, is like, you know, like different stages of the levels of insanity that people go through, like while being in such a high octane, you know, terrible like situation like war, you know.
Yeah. Well, then we get to the Dulong Bridge, which is like the beginning, the entryway into hell, basically. And you know, this scene always reminded me of like Dante's Inferno when they're riding down the river and they see these people just, you know, crashed helicopter and they're floating in the river and just like, you know, asking for help, and you know, you're gonna get what's coming to you. And then there's some dude appears out of nowhere and he's like, I got mail for Captain Willard or whatever, you know. And it's like,
Right.
it's like, now I get the hell out of here, you know. And that's when you see that there's complete chaos and madness. Like they roll up, there's a bridge, you know, and I think it's Phillips who's like, we're not going anywhere. Why don't we just get the hell out of here? It's like all this is madness. They keep blowing that bridge up. We keep rebuilding it on and on and on forever into eternity, you know. And he's like, I got to do what I got to do, you know. And
there's an interesting thing in that scene too that like also paints like the chaos of the Vietnam War is when like Willard gets off the boat and like is talking to like those guys, and they're like, he's like, who's your commanding officer? And the one guy's like, aren't you? You know, like they just don't know what the hell's going on. They're just firing out into the jungle, and you know, they're just completely just sort of like that's sort of like the crossing the veil moment, you know, when you see like the soldiers that are deeper in the jungle, the American soldiers, they're all whacked. They're all whacked out of their fucking mind, you know, and they don't know what the hell's going on. And they're shooting in the jungle, and it's like, can't you hear him? I can hear him fucking screaming, you know. And like they're just all those boys are like just out of their fucking mind, you know, at that point. And then then Willard fucking gets back on the boat. He's like, yeah, there's nothing here, you know. He's like says a line like that. He's like, there's nothing here, you know. And that line's also telling too. Like when he says there's nothing here, it's like, it's not like there's nothing here as far as information. There's also like nothing here in the sense of like what would have represented like human stability.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So that, you know, we go deeper into the mission here, and you know, basically everyone dies on the boat except for you know, Willard finishes his mission, and Lance is the guy who accompanies him out of this whole thing. So I mean, if anyone's like looking for a spoiler-free episode on like a movie that's like over 40 years old, you're not going to find it.
Yeah, you should have watched the movie already.
Yeah. The most interesting part of the film is the ending, where we come up. Willard finally comes up to Kurtz, and he's holed up in this like ancient temple, this abandoned temple, which is like the perfect place for this guy, who has basically set himself up as a god to these people, you know, issuing out all of his philosophies. And we also see in the crowd that Colby, the guy who went missing, who had the original mission, is part of his cult of warriors. And when Kurtz and Willard confront each other, Kurtz is like enveloped in these shadows, and it's really cool the way he's just like this shape, you know. But there's a reason for that, isn't there? So
Coppola, a little callback to when Willard is like going through General Kurtz's files, well, like, you know, that he's been given by the brass. And there's a picture of Marlon Brando like as an enlisted man, and that's from a movie called like something through the Golden Eye. I can't remember what the actual film is called. I think it's like Portraits Through a Golden Eye, something along these lines. And it's Reflections of a Golden Eye. So all these military stills that are used in this movie Apocalypse Now are taken from that film.
Oh, okay.
That Marlon Brando filmed back in, you know, whenever he filmed that back in the 60s, early 60s, I'm guessing. And anyway, Francis Ford Coppola like hadn't seen Marlon Brando for a long time. No one had seen Marlon Brando. If anyone listening knows like how Marlon Brando was after like shooting like The Godfather and stuff like that, he became quite a recluse and didn't really like want to do anything with Hollywood anymore. And he became quite overweight. And so Marlon Brando, who is supposed to be like this, decorated war veteran, larger than life sort of guy, shows up on set fat. And Coppola is pissed by this, and so but Coppola still wants him in the film. So his approach to this is to sort of just like drape him in black clothing and not really film him in any kind of like direct light. But in this, there is a genius that I don't think Marlon Brando knew that this was going to happen. I don't think Coppola knew this was going to happen either. But by doing this, by having to like overcome this obstacle, I think you create like the best villain scenes out of almost any movie ever, because you never really see General Kurtz like fully, aside from like when he cuts off Chef's head, you see him for a second, but other than that, he's always kind of shrouded, in this like cloak of darkness, and I think that really lends to like sort of the mystery around Marlon Brando's character in this film.
Yeah, and furthermore, he didn't even read the script, nor did he read the I think 85 pages or 90-page Heart of Darkness novella.
Yeah.
So he had literally no idea what the movie was about, probably, and fairly large amount of his lines are improvised, like in these scenes.
Yeah, I think you and I both like this line when they first had their first encounter, and he goes, what are you, an assassin? And Martin Sheen's character Willard says, no, I'm a soldier. And he goes, you're neither. He goes, you're an errand boy working for a grocery clerk going to collect the bill. And that line was actually improvised by Brando in the shooting of that scene, which I think is a fucking amazing line, though. Which is a testament to, say what you want to say about Marlon Brando, but he's a pedigree actor. He's been doing films for a very, very long time. So, and I think that was actually a glorious line in that film.
Yeah, it's
I'm
great.
I'm glad they kept it in there too.
There's also a scene which I suspect was improvised, where it's during when Kurtz and Willard are talking, where he's like, "Where are you from, Captain Willard?"
The Ohio River thing.
He's like, he's like, he's like, Toledo, Ohio. He's like, how far from the river are you? And there's like a long pause, and he's like, about 200 miles, sir. And then he goes into this whole thing about gardenias and plants and flowers and all this stuff. And it's just like so brilliant.
That sounds like a Marlon Brando improvised line to me.
Oh my God, man. It's just so incredible, I think. And I mean, not if you're the director. Obviously Coppola was probably losing his mind during these moments. But,
he probably was.
Yeah. But for the film, the viewer, it's like, it just adds such a layer of depth, and even this depth is an illusion, because this guy is like, improvising all this stuff. He doesn't even really understand the character, honestly, but it's just Marlon Brando adding his layer of insanity to this like insane film, really.
Yeah, that's what I love about that too, is because I feel like a real crazy person would actually sort of gravitate towards like those sort of strange details that maybe you and I wouldn't. If we're like telling a story, like, we wouldn't expound on like the gardenias on like the bank of this island that's like down that,
which may or may not even exist.
Yeah, it might not even exist, right? You don't really know. And I think that's again like a genius on Marlon Brando's ability to be unprepared for a role, but still like, come show up and deliver. Like, I mean, say what you want to say about the preparation that he did, which obviously was less than adequate compared to like what everyone else in this film like sacrificed in order to be in this film, but he still delivered like an A+ like performance, like, and I mean, that's what you get from an actor like that, someone who's got the discography that he has. He's going to be able to like to pull some stuff out of his ass like that, and I'm glad he did, because it makes the character of Kurtz all the more likable and detestable at the same time.
And maybe that's what you need to do with Brando, or you needed to do back then, is not have him read the script and have him just show up and you just kind of give him a sketch of what the scene is about. Because, like, when guys are really into improv, there's like this misunderstanding that, oh, improv, you just make everything up. It's like, no, well, they have a setting that they understand. And the idea is that you're supposed to understand the setting and the character to the extent where you can formulate your own situations and your own dialogue. And that's really
Right.
the nature of improvisation. But Brando probably had still his entire life probably had no idea what the movie was about. You know what I mean?
No, and I think what you're saying is absolutely true, because I think there's two types of improv, and there's like the loose improv that what you're speaking to at this moment, where like I just need to know like the general gist of like what's going on, and then I will sort of develop the character amidst like these like like keynotes. But then you have someone like what can't I think of his fucking name right now? Last of the Mohicans guy, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
the Daniel Day-Lewis guy who like fully immerses himself in a character and can't be bothered to be spoken to unless you're speaking to the character that he's playing, and like doesn't want to be like surrounded by anything that would take away from like that immersion that he's trying to like portray in whatever film he's trying to portray. Both of which are very, in my opinion, like they're very successful methods at like creating a believable character.
Yeah.
I think with too much direction and from a director, perhaps you can lose sort of like I don't know that if Marlon Brando had stuck to the script and had like read all the books and like and had like like followed everything point by point, the character would be as effective as it is with the looseness that Marlon Brando sort of like took. We'll never know, but in my opinion, I think his portrayal of Kurtz is unmatched. I think it's perfect. I really do.
Also, kudos to Martin Sheen for rolling with it too.
Yeah, absolutely right.
That scene especially, like he's like, who even knows if the character of Willard was supposed to be from Toledo? Like, who knows?
Yeah, we don't know, right? That might have just been something that Marlon Brando did, and then it just became canon after the fact.
And FYI, Toledo, Ohio, is located on a river, but it's not the Ohio River.
So he probably had been there, and he probably was like remembering like sparse facts about that area and like just improvising that like whole thing.
Because he asked him the Ohio River when he asked him how many miles from the river are you?
Right. It's 200, right?
And Toledo is on a fucking river. It's just it's a different river though than the Ohio River. Isn't that crazy?
It is. It is crazy, and I love it.
Yeah,
I absolutely love it.
Oh my god, it's just like little details like that blow my mind, man.
We also glossed over. There was Dennis Hopper as well is a part of this whole thing right now. So I think we should briefly touch on his character as well.
Yeah, okay. I mean, there's like the scene where Kurtz is reading The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot, and the interpretation of that is that, Kurtz, he identifies with the Hollow Men of the Eliot poem, and, it touches on like how war is just and, the military is a necessity and that sort of thing. But all the time that he's spent in darkness and all of his atrocities that he's committed and his realization that you cannot be civilized in chaos. And it made him focus on the pointlessness, the complete lack of value of war itself, aside from satisfying, oligarchs and things like that, and rulers and politicians and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and in this scene, there's a great moment when he's reading the Hollow Men, and Sheen and Hopper's character are like kind of sitting off to the side, listening to Kurtz read this Hollow Men thing, and Dennis Hopper's like, who is completely infatuated with Marlon Brando's character of Kurtz. There's a great line prior to this scene that I'm going to speak about, where he's like, no, but if you could just meet the man, he's like, he expands my mind. He's like, did you know that like the middle word of life is if, just lines like that, man, like they're just golden lines, and but there's this in this scene in particular, Dennis Hopper's character, the unnamed photojournalist, he says to Willard, he goes like, but the world doesn't end with a whimper, but with a whimper. And it seems like a redundant statement, but if you know this Holloman poem by T.S. Eliot, the very last line is like, the world doesn't end with a bang, but with a whimper. And so like that's a little and there's a lot of in this particular moment, there's a lot of really, to kind of break immersion from the actual film itself, there's a lot of like really smart literary references in this moment. And so I don't know if you knew this, because I don't know if you read The Hollow Men, but I read The Hollow Men after watching this film. And the very first line in The Hollow Men is, Mr. Kurtz, he's dead. So the poem The Hollow Men is actually T.S. Eliot writing a poem in response to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. But they leave that line out when Brando's actually reading the poem itself. Obviously, because it would break immersion to like read a poem that's about Kurtz.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, I mean, I read Heart of Darkness, but I wasn't aware of some of the other stuff I think you're going to say. So yeah.
Yeah. So well,
I read Heart of Darkness and the Wasteland and Hollow Man, but you're about to get into some stuff I haven't read. Yeah.
Yeah. But I wanted the listener to know that that Hollow Man poem that Brando's character is reading is actually a poem that T.S. Eliot wrote in response to the book Heart of Darkness. So that's a little like literary reference to like the origin story of like this movie, right? Yeah. And then after this scene, Willard, Martin Sheen's character, is going through some of the belongings of Kurtz, and he like goes through his medals, and he looks at his nightstand, and on his nightstand there's two books. One of the book is called The Ritual and the Romance, and the other book is called The Golden Bough. And I knew about The Golden Bough, but I didn't know about this Ritual and Romance. So I looked it up, and The Ritual and the Romance is a book written by a guy named Wester, I think, Joseph Wester. And the book is like a book that sort of accounts like all the things that King Arthur did, but it was a direct influence to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And The Wasteland talks about like the concepts of like death and life and life and death. And and there seems to be like this T.S. Eliot thing seems to have like an underlying current in the story or in the storytelling of Kurtz's character. And then The Golden Bough is written by a Scottish anthropologist by the name of James Fraser. And it's a thesis. It's like a comparative thesis based on talking about old pagan religions. And it was Fraser's thesis that old pagan religions were mostly just fertility cults that periodically would sacrifice their king, which I find very telling and sort of foreshadowing like the events that will come to be towards the end of this film. And also interesting enough, the name Golden Bough is actually taken from the Latin epic called the Aeneid, and written by Virgil. Yep. And there's a part in this epic where Aeneas and a Sibyl go to the underworld, and they have to present a golden bow to the gatekeeper of the underworld in order to like gain entrance into Hades. And again, all of these things sort of kind of coincide with like what you were saying about this being like sort of like a divine comedy, right? You know, like a journey into the underworld, right? A
Yeah.
journey into the depths of hell, right?
Totally.
So I think these books were obviously they're in the movie. So like Francis Ford Coppola wanted you to see these books and wanted you to like find sort of like some sort of like connection between these books and the actual story that's being told. And I just thought it was a very interesting moment. If you take the time to like look into these books and see why he picked these two books in particular, and also the Hollow Men poem, but T.S. Eliot, having a direct reference to the Joseph Conrad book, Heart of Darkness. I think it was just very interesting and smart literary choices to sort of like just pepper in to the story very briefly, but like to pepper them in there just to sort of give you like a little context behind who this character Kurtz is.
I wasn't aware of that, and I came up with the Divine Comedy thing independent of that. So that's really, it's maybe I was on to something with that. I don't know. It's interesting.
I think you were. I mean, I was actually kind of, when we were talking about this on the phone prior to doing this, I kind of like chuckled to myself when you mentioned like the Inferno like analogy, because I think that is very paramount, and I do think there's a lot of parallels to be drawn there with this story that's being told.
So there is a sense that Kurtz is really ready to die too in this whole thing. I mean, we talked about when their first confrontation, he knows what Willard is there for, and that's possibly because Colby showed up for the same reason earlier. But I think that he looks at Willard and he's like, this is the man who's going to end my life, basically. You know? And he basically gives Willard his final mission, which is to tell his son the truth about him. And he's like his whole philosophy, and he talks about a moment when in an earlier mission where there was a village where they inoculated the villagers, and the Viet Cong came in and basically cut everyone's arms off. And this is
a pile of little arms, and I wept like a grandma.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And that's when that's when the realization came to him, like a diamond bullet through the center of his head, is I think some of the language that he used. Yeah. Where he's like, you have to become barbaric, and you have to be able to kill without any judgment, any kind of apprehension or even passion. You have to just execute these things and do what you need to do in order to be successful at something which is ultimately absurd and totally chaotic, which is like the idea of war, complete pointlessness,
And it's hard to tell in that scene for me as well if Kurtz has become insane and totalitarian, or if he has succumbed to what it means to win a war that's horrible, right? Because in the same breath that he says that I wept like some sort of like grieving grandmother, he also in the same breath says that and just like a diamond bullet shot out of a gun into my forehead, I realized like the pureness, like the true strength it takes to be able to do something that and it's hard to tell if he admires the people that did that, or if he realized that in order to overcome the evils, you have to become even more evil.
Yeah. Well,
it's an interesting scene for sure.
Definitely, for sure. And I think the whole concept of breaking points too. I mean, this is like, way back in the beginning, we talk about breaking points. The whole movie is about breaking. Each of these characters finding their breaking points. Even Chef, he found his breaking point with the tiger.
Right. Right.
And Dennis Hopper's character, the unnamed American journalist, makes a statement that he's saying that the man is clear in his mind, but his soul is mad.
Yeah, I love that. I love that line too.
I think that's really one of the more significant moments, which kind of beckons to this scene where after experiencing all this atrocity and seeing all these horrible things, his soul was driven mad, but his deductive reasoning was sound. And that's why Kurtz became who he was, and then when he's talking to Willard about, he's like, there's nothing I detest more than the stench of lies, knowing that Corman and all of his, acolytes are going to tell his family their version of what's going on, filtered through the civilization of the U.S. military, that this guy lost his mind. He was renegade. He just went off and he was out of, so we had to do what we had to do. And I'm sure they would even, paint the picture that we didn't kill him. He was killed by his own men or whatever. The Viet Cong finally got him, something like that. There would be a lie. There would be an untruth told. So,
and we're coming up to the crescendo of this film, and I think it's important to point out, just on what you had mentioned a little bit earlier about like how Kurtz like views like Willard as like he's going to be like sort of his, his saving grace, if you will, like towards the and throughout the interactions that Kurtz and Willard have had, in a lot of it, Willard is actually imprisoned in like a bamboo sort of like makeshift like standing cell, or he's like he's laying in the dirt, but he's got like a cord wrapped around his neck so he can't go anywhere without choking himself. And then eventually like he gets let free. And there's a line with Martin Sheen's character where it's like, he knew what I was going to do before I even knew what I was going to do. So like he didn't feel any threat to like finally like let Martin Sheen's character like loose, And Martin Sheen's laying in the boat, the PBR, and he has this like grand realization in this moment that Colonel Kurtz doesn't want to go out like some, I think he says something along the lines like he didn't want to go out like some old man, like he wanted to go out as a soldier. And it's in this moment where we get the final 10 minutes of the film, and it's a glorious 10 minutes of the film.
Yeah, he also talks about how he just wanted the pain to end too, where when he let Willard go, it was almost like, okay, now it's time to die, basically. He was like, I've bestowed upon you, I've given your final mission. I've done everything I can do. Life is absurd. There's just darkness and despair around me, and it's time to check out. Basically, that's how I read that whole thing.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So now we have this moment, right? We have Willard, and Willard, in very much the same light as Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator, finally comes to task and covers his face with camouflage face paint, jumps in the water, and we get the iconic scene of Martin Sheen's head popping out of the muddy water, and we see a new Willard in this moment, like a Willard with real purpose. I think he's got a mission to do, and you can see it in his eyes. We don't see, he's never really fumbling, or throughout the film we can kind of see like the coldness, but we never really see Willard throughout this film as like an actual assassin, or like what he's actually good at. It's hinted at throughout the film, especially like in the very opening scene where he's like having lunch with those guys, and they ask him if he has ever done was he ever like responsible for like the killing of these people and this kind of stuff, and he goes, I cannot confirm or can deny these things, so we never really see like what the character of Willard is capable of until like this last moment when he's turned on, when he gets turned on. Well, and this is a very interesting scene. I love this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the reason he responds that way is because he's like a black ops guy, you know what I mean? And that's what the required answer is. Is like, I can't, it's top secret, doesn't exist. And they even said this mission doesn't exist either.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that Willard really is uncomfortable with a lot of what he's being asked to do by the brass. And there's a point where he's even like, I don't even know. I wasn't even sure what I was going to do when I got there. I mean, it's like, if you think about it, it's like you kill another American, a guy who you're on the same side as, but then you see all this stuff, and then you realize after talking to him and learning about all this stuff, you realize it's It's almost like a mercy killing in some ways. It's like he's aiding him in his own suicide. That's how I read a lot of this stuff. And then
Yeah,
there's
I agree.
there's also the angle which we see when he murders him. He murders him like in this really with a sword, basically, like a machete. And it's this very primal thing. And when he emerges from the temple after assassinating Kurtz, it beckons back to like early man, like a primate, like killing another member to get a different dominance in the group or something, and the cult, I'm going to call him a cult. They view him almost as like, this is our new god, like our new leader. This is him.
Yeah, they all take a knee and like let him pass, right?
Yeah, it's like a real heavy like ending to the movie, and then he just collects Lance and they leave. And they get on the boat and float away.
Well, I also in this scene also took away another thing too. Well, two things actually. One thing I wanted to touch on that you and I had talked about previously. So sort of aid in like the comparison of this movie having like an underlying dark comedy feel to it. There's a scene just right before. So Willard comes out of the water. And he's sneaking around, and you see him like he's like a ninja at this point, right? You get to see like Willard in action at this point, right? And he sneaks through this huge party that they're having outside, and this like cow sacrifice that they're doing out in this like big courtyard outside of the temple. He sneaks into the temple. He finds a guard. He slits his throat, and he's slowly, stealthily like walking up on Kurtz. And Kurtz is reading from one of his many memoirs that he's written while he's been there into like this tape recorder. And there's this line that it's very pertinent. And I think it's very important to sort of like to kind of like digest a bit, where he reads this line and he says the United States Air Force will not let the airmen paint the word fuck on the side of their planes because they deem it too obscene. And then it's right after he utters this line that he notices that Willard's behind him. And it is also important to notice, to state that when Willard does assassinate Kurtz actually does fight back a little bit. He doesn't just accept it. He actually does sort of move around a bit and sort of block the swings that are coming at him. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on is about those little literary references that were like dropped a little bit earlier in the film from this moment. And they all touch on like old pagan religions. And if you think about like the Scandinavians and like the Viking culture, right? In the Viking culture, like the only honorable death is a death on the battlefield, right?
Right. Yep.
And I think that's very important to sort of it's not really expounded on, it's not really touched on, but I got that kind of vibe that not with just the books that were like laid out on the nightstand, but also in that last little moment where Martin Sheen's kind of his thoughts are narrating the scene, and he's like saying that like he realizes that he doesn't want to die as an old man, but he wants to die as a soldier. You get like this sort of like Viking sort of influence there, where like Marlon Brando's character, for whatever reason, believes that he has to go out a warrior. So he wants death by the blade. And I think the blade thing is also very important too, because there are guns available, right?
Sure.
But
yeah,
Martin Sheen opts for the blade instead of the sword, or instead of the gun,
Yeah.
And I think that's also I think it's very subtle, but I think it's very important in this scene too, that to die by the blade is sort of like this old, it goes back to the, if Ritual and Romance is about King Arthur and the Golden Bough is about pagan religions, right? Well, all those old like medieval and Viking cultures, they all believe by death by the sword. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like the best execution you could get, like in English times, having your head cut off by an axe was considered inhumane because axes were typically blunt and it took multiple whacks, right?
Yeah.
But if you were an honorable knight that like did something horrible, like if you were considered, like if you had been accused of treason, a knight would be executed by a sword because the sword was sharper and the cut would be clean, and that's in the medieval times, right? But then you go back to like the Viking times and like death on the battlefield, right?
Yeah.
Death by blades. So there's twofold things going on here that like are sort of foreshadowed by these like literary like references that they drop a little bit earlier on in the film. And I find that very telling, but it's never really expounded upon. So it's the only speculation that I have in the scene. But I feel like that was the intention there with that execution scene of Kurtz.
Yeah, no, that wasn't lost on me either, man. That's the fact, because all these years I've been watching and rewatching this movie, I'm like, why don't you just shoot him? You know, but it's like, yeah, there had to be some element of conflict at the end, you know.
Yeah.
So just you know, some final words about this too is my takeaway from this is that in general, the reality that we choose to live in is kind of an illusion, and you know, we collectively, you know, build up these constructs versus what's actually going on in the world, you know, and humans are these kind of data chunking hunters and gatherers, you know. This film and the absurdity, the comedy that arises from these illusions that we have, Kurtz was able to see true reality amidst all of the illusions and constructs that the civilization had placed on it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, superimposed over chaos. He saw that war was chaos, war was pointless, and if we are going to engage in war, that we have to give up all of the humane, civilized constructs that we put up and have to really engage in that whole thing. And that's kind of like what I think his moment with the severed arms is. That's his moment of realization, and that's when he decided that it's like, you know, there's no rules. Like this is completely absurd to not allow these airmen to print fuck on the side of their plane as they napalm, you know, civilians and children, and, you know, as well as the forest, the rainforest.
Right.
So that's kind of like my whole, you know, takeaway from this thing after spending a lifetime of watching this movie like every few months, you know.
Mine is it's very closely similar to yours. And you had mentioned earlier, and I really liked the way you put it. I think breaking points is my takeaway, but breaking points with like sort of like looking inside of yourself are the two things that I take away from this film, because I think obviously this displays, you know, the horrors of war and the levels of mental like strength that people have, and the difference in, you know, the people that can stand there while bombs are going off and like not be fazed by it at all, or like the people who see like a woman running for something and they start shooting, you know, or, you know, just like the different levels of crazy. But I think it's like in a way it's an introspective film to show that like we all kind of start off like Kurtz or Willard, and the deeper we go into the jungle, the deeper we go into ourselves, and either find the strength that we didn't know we had, or find the insanity that we didn't know we had, and then this story sort of just tells that, you know, that, you know, you can take a decorated soldier like Colonel Kurtz and throw him in the jungle and he sees something so horrible that he loses his mind. Or you can take somebody like Willard, who has seen equally as horrible things and has done equally as horrible things, but can keep calm throughout the entire ordeal, you know. And it's I think on many levels this is a psychological thriller in a lot of ways.
Sure. Yeah.
And it really touches on like what people are capable of at their worst.
Now the question is did Willard ever actually reach his breaking point? I don't think so, honestly.
I don't know, but there is a thing in this movie that doesn't sit well with me, and I don't know what to make of it. But and I know it's in his orders to assassinate Kurtz.
Yes.
But it's never, unless I missed it, it's never told to Willard that he needs to bring any kind of proof back. And yet he takes a lot of his writings and carries them out with him. And I don't know if that was like so like, if you're going to go back to so there's a very interesting scene also there when he's going through his writings. There's a big scrawling in red ink or red pencil that says "exterminate all the brutes," right?
Yep.
And that's actually a callback to or it says "exterminate the enemies," but that's a callback to the Joseph Conrad book.
It's a
where
line
he
in
says
Heart's Darkness.
yeah. So that's a little nod to the book. But there's something else in the book that's not really, like we said, like the book is an inspiration for the movie, but they're not really like telling the same story. But in the book, Marlowe, who is Willard's character, is sort of infatuated with the man Kurtz in the book Heart of Darkness.
Yeah.
And I wonder at the end of that, does that represent like Willard sort of like having some compassion for the man or like some infatuation with the man? Because I don't see the purpose of taking I know he has to like talk to his son, right? And all that kind of stuff. So that could be like, that's all that is. But it also could be that Willard had some respect for the man at the end of it, and you're not really ever like given any sort of, because the movie just ends, so you don't really know if he was infatuated with the man or had respect for him, or if he was simply taking like these writings because it was the last thing of like who the man Kurtz really was, to give it to his son. You don't really know.
Well, the way I saw it was that his final mission was to tell his son about Kurtz, Kurtz's son, about his life, and tell him the truth, that he there was a method. He didn't just go crazy. Well, debatably, and from Kurtz's perspective, he didn't go nuts and just start acting on his own. And that he was going to present that stuff to his son once he got to an appropriate age to where he can understand what's going on with this thing. And that's why he left with all of Kurtz's writings. That was my takeaway.
But to do something like that, then you would have to have some like level of respect for the man.
Well, yeah. I mean, I thought it was pretty clear that he thought that it's complicated. I think that Willard believed that Kurtz was probably wrong. Like, he's not following orders. We all agreed that we're going to do this thing as we're directed to by the U.S. military.
Right.
Willard is still a soldier. He's not. He's like doing his mission. I think that what Kurtz was saying resonated with him, to a certain degree, because he saw just the general absurdity of his mission and the whole point and the pointlessness of war and all that sort of stuff. But on the same level, I don't think that he was going to become like a descendant of his or join his cult or anything like that, or even take his mantle as the leader of this group. I thought that he was like,
no,
okay.
I don't either. But like, I think it's like one of those sort of like, even like a Lovecraftian or like sort of like aspect too, or like, the protagonist, to some extent, will not leave this experience without being like afflicted by it in some way. And yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I do agree with you. Like, he's still a soldier. He still has a job. And so like his job now is to like, take this and tell the truth to his son,
Yeah.
But to have respect for somebody, even, in the soldier community, right? Like, they wouldn't have even sent like Willard there in the first place to assassinate Kurtz had they not thought that like he had gone like, committed treason and gone AWOL. And so like, if Willard is a soldier, he lives by a certain code, then you would think that he would have some sort of like detestation like towards Kurtz. But the fact that he's willing to like fulfill like this journey after Kurtz is dead tells me that on some level he had respect for the man. And that's just an interesting concept, because you killed the guy, you obviously don't agree with what he's doing, yet you're still willing to like show some sort of like empathy towards the man and like do the thing, fulfill the wish of a dying man kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's what makes the movie interesting. I mean, it's like, I also don't think anyone is just like an automaton, like they just do what they're told. I think they have to execute some kind of analysis of it, but also it's like, yeah, he's still, that's why I question whether or not he actually hit his breaking point. You know what I mean? Like, because he was still, obviously going through all this hardship. The beginning, he seemed pretty broken, but he was able to collect himself and show up at the meeting that he had with the brass, and get it together enough to go upriver and do his job. And still, at the end, he hadn't completely given over to the madness. Like, he was still rational in a lot of his thinking. And that's why, like, I'm like, man, everyone broke in this movie except for Willard, really,
Yeah. And that's why this film will always be worth a rewatch, because I think you'll always find new things in the film that you didn't notice before. I mean, I noticed a lot, like, on these rewatches that I did, like, leading up to this podcast, that I hadn't caught, prior to that. And especially because I had a different reason for watching these, watching this film again. And I think this film is genius in that it doesn't give you sort of any real closure, and it just sort of ends. It ends with him walking out of that temple, and that's it. Roll credits, and it's like, it's a perfect film in that sense, because, like any good story, it's left up for the viewer to kind of make your own, like, decision on, like, what you just watched.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for listening. This is an ongoing thing that's going to appear on the Everything Went Black Patreon in the future, but this is a version that we came out on the free normal stream for anyone who is not yet a Patreon member. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Evan. Appreciate your time. And
yep.
So take care, everyone.
Yeah, looking forward to this, man. I can't wait to keep on doing this. Take care, everybody.
Saigon. Shit. I'm still only in Saigon. Every time I think I'm gonna wake up back in the jungle. When I was home after my first tour, it was worse. I'd wake up and there'd be nothing.